We are on week 41 of Bible Engagement, The Life of Christ. We started talking about the parables, some of the parables of Jesus. And we could cover long periods of time on just those alone, details. But last week we covered the parable of the sower. And then this week we're going to pick up with some of the remaining. We're only going to get through two of them today. So we began looking at these parables during Jesus' ministry. For those who may not remember or who may have not been here for this information last week, parables are a common teaching method in Jewish culture. The dictionary says they're short stories that illustrate a moral attitude of religious principle. There were stories with a deeper spiritual meaning, and Christ used them to reveal the truth to those open to understanding, but to conceal the truths from those who were not. Last week we covered the parable of the sower, as I said a while ago. The remaining ones we have that we're going to cover are the parable of the weeds, the parable of the net, the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of yeast, the parable of hidden treasure, and the parable of the pearl. Today I'm going to try to get into weeds and net. They're very similar to one another as far as their message. We'll start out with the parable of the weeds. Both of these two, parable of the weeds, parable of the net, both point out two types of people in two different places. Jesus often divided people into two groups throughout the Bible. They're putting it over in piano for right now. Jesus divided it into two groups. Those Matthew chapter 7. I'm not going there. We'll be in Matthew chapter 13 today. But in Matthew chapter 7, the two groups were those who built their house on a rock and those who built their house on the sand. In Matthew chapter 12 was those who are for Jesus and those who are against Jesus. Matthew chapter 13, we see the wheat and the weeds. Then in Matthew, which is what we'll be talking about here in a minute, also we see in Matthew 13, we see the good fish and the bad fish. In Matthew chapter 25, you see the wise virgins and the foolish virgins. Also in 25, you see the sheep and the goats. Then in John chapter 5, we see those who do good and those who do evil. And in John chapter 10, those who know Jesus' voice and those who do not know Jesus' voice. Basically, these two categories and all of these are summed up in as two different groups, the righteous and the unrighteous. And Jesus is basically telling you there's no in between. You're one or the other. You fall in one category or the other. You're not. I'm somewhat righteous, and when I say that, I know that yes, we do fail as human beings. We do make mistakes, but righteousness is not our own. It is something that God has given us and the ability to live for Him. So it's those two categories: those who are actually serving God and those who are not. Those who are following after God and those who are not. So here in Matthew chapter 13 today, we're going to be in verse 24 to 30. Jesus actually explains he tells this parable. Then in verses 36 to 43, he actually explains what he was saying. Jesus told them another parable, it says in verse 24. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemies came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? The enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time I'll tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. So we just read this. I'm not going into the explanation just yet. But what do you think Jesus is trying to say here when he's talking about the wheat and the weeds?
Getting all the bad stuff out of your life.
Okay, that would be one good illustration for it. Because the reality is that, we do have things growing in us at times that we've got to get rid of. But it's a little bit more broader than that, in the sense of it's talking about people, groups of people.
Right. So, separating like righteous and unrighteous, or the bad and the good.
Right.
Because the weeds aren't considered anything good.
Right.
And then the wheat would be what you'd be looking.
Okay. So the wheat is the good, the weeds are not. So that's the righteous would be the wheat, the unrighteous would be the weeds. He chooses to let them grow together as opposed to pulling them apart. Now, from a agricultural standpoint, depending on how you look at this, is whether that makes sense or not. Because we know that weeds typically tend to choke out what is good. But he chooses not to, and he tells us why in there. He says, because, can you remember? If you pull them up, you may uproot the good stuff. So we're looking at this story here, and there's a lot of times in our life that we would love to, as Christians, to be totally isolated from those that's in the world. It'd be nice to be that way. You would think it would be easier to serve God when you're surrounded by nothing but Christians. But here's the reality. Utopia doesn't exist other than heaven. So having a utopia and utopian ideas that people have tried it many times over throughout history, they've never worked. You even keep people from being influenced by the outside world in any way, shape, or form, and they will still, eventually somebody will do something really bad wrong.
So, where I don't have a job,
Mm-hmm.
and I got most of my friends out of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I do stay at home all day long,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not in a good way. And you would think that was a great thing, but it's not, because all my thoughts get to me,
Yeah.
like, a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as a matter of fact, the other day, I was reading my Bible, and I'm still trying to get through Luke.
Mm-hmm.
Heather will be proud of me.
Yeah.
But, I got to the part where the woman came in and she was crying at Jesus' feet. She wiped her hair, wiped his feet with her hair, and she put perfume and everything on her. And where I've been dealing with a certain person,
Mm-hmm.
I broke out in tears like really bad, because the devil started saying, I have asked her, God asked, if I'm a good Christian and if I'm doing right.
Mm-hmm.
And it just got to me really, really bad. But it is not utopia, like you said. It's actually really bad.
Mm-hmm. Well, other side of that is that sometimes when we do rid ourselves of things that don't need to be in our life, or people who don't need to be in our life, and there's nothing, that's a good thing to do. It's replacing them with something that's better. You just, and that doesn't mean that, Everett's better than, Larry over here, That means that, you're replacing them with somebody that is more focused on what you need to be focused on. And that's great that you would do that. But that the other side of that is you still are going to be surrounded by people who aren't saved. And you're still going to have those people around you. I work in the Lowe's world, as a vendor. Everett works in KU world as I bet basically you guys are a company outside of KU, and you do work for KU. Not everybody there's a Christian. Not everybody you'd run into. I run into a few here and there that are, and Then I run into some that say they are, and then you get to talking to them and you realize they aren't. And then, it's just, there's all kinds out there. We are in this world as Christians, but we're not of this world. We belong to God. And so this is illustrating how basically in that situation, we have to take the good, as the righteous of God, we still have to be surrounded by those that aren't. We can't, until we get in heaven, there's no other option. And the truth of the matter is, if he were to uproot some of those people in our lives, we wouldn't grow. We need that growth. We need those challenges. We need those things to help us to mature and grow. So, it's not always a bad thing to have people in your life that aren't Christians. It's just whenever those individuals are pulling you away that you shouldn't go, or they're doing something that's not right and you know it, and those kinds of things, then you gotta, huh? Yeah, distance yourself from it. So we go into verses 36 to 43, and Jesus begins to explain this parable to the disciples. It says, then he left the crowd in verse 36 and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear. So, as we review these parables, we see Jesus saying that the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sows good seed in his field. The enemy snuck in at night, sowed weeds in his wheat field, and later as the wheat grew, the servants noticed that the wheat was mixed with weeds. They knew that good seed was sown, so how could that have happened? And what that basically means is they knew that the seed that they sowed wasn't mixed with something that it shouldn't have been. So the good seed that was sown was the wheat. They knew that they'd put wheat seed out there. How did they get weeds there? So the owner recognized it as the work of one of his enemies, someone trying to make his crops fail, trying to make it hard on him. He instructed them to leave the weeds in the field with the wheat because it would do more damage to try to rid the field of the weeds. So he instructed them to allow them both to grow together and to harvest. Then he would instruct the harvesters that they would remove the weeds and burn them, then gather the wheat and bring it to the barns. So it was at that point in time that they would have them uproot the weeds and get rid of them, bundle them up, throw them in the furnace. Jesus is explaining it that the sower of the seed is the Son of Man, the Messiah, Jesus. The field is the world we live in. In that field, there are two types of seeds. There are two types of people in the world. The good seed is the people of the kingdom, the wheat. Joey pointed that out earlier. The weeds are the bad seed, the people of the evil one. They're the lost. Now, there's another group of people that also fall in that category, and that's those who claim to be Christians, but they aren't. Because the reality is you're either one or the other. You're not both. You can't be both. You can't straddle the fence. The enemy that sowed the bad seed is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, which is judgment. Harvesters are the angels who will weed out of God's kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. And the lost will be thrown in the blazing furnace where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, which is eternal punishment, hell. And the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father, which is heaven and the New Jerusalem at the end of Revelation. So then we go into the parable of the net. In the parable of the net, we see the same idea is taught there. verses 47 to 50 says, "Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down into the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, the fishermen pulled it up to the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets, but threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous, throw them into the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." So the good fish and the bad fish. Now, you know, if David goes fishing, Everett goes fishing. Larry, do you fish ever? Every now and again. Now, you know, David is a little bit more of the, I'm fishing for bass or I'm fishing for that. So he gets certain baits and he gets out there. I'm fishing for crappie and he gets certain baits. And typically he catches what he goes for. Now, sometimes he'll have to call what comes because it's not the right size and he can't legally keep it, you know, that kind of thing. But for the most part, he casts his rod in. He's going for a largemouth bass. He pulls it out. He's getting a largemouth bass. It's crappie. He casts it in. He's pulling out. He's getting a crappie. And, you know, or striper. Now, striper, I love striper. It's like eating chicken. I mean, seriously. The meat is a lot more solid than regular fish meat. And so, you know, whichever type he's going for, that's what he typically will get. Will he get something else occasionally? Probably. But for the most part, he gets what he goes for. But see, they didn't fish like that. The disciples that were fishermen, the way they fished was with nets. The net's not discriminatory.
If it swims, it's gone.
Yeah, if it's in the way of that net's... You ever see videos where there are even movies where fishermen are out, or shows where fishermen are out and they run the nets and then they drag their nets and then they pull them out and then they have all tons of fish. Forrest Gump, yeah. Shrimp, boiled shrimp. Anyway, don't get me started. Shrimp scampi. So, I mean, you know, you're not always getting what you go for. And as a result of that, what do? You got to do? You got to call it. You got to go through there and get rid of what you're not needing. So when they cast their nets, they don't only catch good fish, they catch bad fish. So the fishermen have to call the fish out that they caught. They put the good in baskets and the bad ones they throw away. Now, you know, if you were to throw a net in Laurel Lake and you get bass and you get, carp and you get, you know, a catfish and you get bluegill, well, I would keep the catfish and the bluegill and maybe the bass, but I'd throw out the carp, you know. And some people would not throw them back in either. They just get rid of them because they don't like carp at all. Now, the angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous. This is what he's telling us. This is what this is talking about, that the angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them in the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Both heaven and hell are eternal. Once you're there, that's where you're at. So while in heaven, we see the two different places that are being shown here is while we're in heaven, basically, we're going to be worshiping and we're going to be spending time with God. We're going to be singing, all those kinds of things. But the lost it's telling us the lost will grind their teeth in hell. Now, I that would bother me. I honestly, that right there would be enough punishment for me. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I have ground my teeth and I know it, Zechariah, after he started getting teeth, occasionally you would hear him grind his teeth while he was asleep. Like, no. Oh, it would drive me at the wall. I mean, you know, I just couldn't handle it. I don't know how I did, but I did. I got through it, but, you know, it's like running your fingers across a chalkboard for me. And so anyway, gnashing of teeth. Basically, you're in that much agony. You're in that much anguish. Mark chapter 9, verses 47 to 48, I'm going to read that real quick. It says, it describes hell and what it'll be like. It says, if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into hell. Now, before I'll clarify, it doesn't mean go make yourself blind. It's talking about cutting things out of your life that will tempt you, that will take you down the wrong path. It says, but it's better to have one eye than to have two eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worm that eats them do not die, and the fire is not quenched. So basically, he's telling us in Mark chapter 9, there is no relief in hell. You know, Bella last night, she's in pain a lot. You all don't really know how much pain this girl goes through. There are times, well, some of you don't know probably because you've not gone through what she goes through. But you know, if you've had that condition, then you kind of understand. She was in a lot of pain last night when she got home. She gets to she goes to bed. I'm in there working on stuff for today. In the living room, Jess has already gone to bed because she's trying to get Zachariah put down, and she's wore out too. She's done giving Bella her medicine, tucked her in. It's probably getting close to 1 o'clock in the morning, about 12:31, something like that. Bella comes in crying in the living room. She comes over and sits in my lap and wants me to hold her, and I hold her, and her skin is on fire. I mean, it was like she was a furnace. I'm not talking about like running a temperature. She was just burning. And I'm like, she don't feel good. And I got to talking to her a little bit. She's like, I feel like I'm burning up. And she said, but I'm not hot. She said, I just feel like I'm burning up. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So anyway, I went in to get ready for bed not long after that. And then it's probably about 1:30 or so. I go in there and I tell Jess, but Jess is half out of it. When you talk to her, you think she's wide awake, and she's not. I had a whole conversation with her. I had to tell her again this morning. I went back in there to check on Bella before I went to bed, and she's like, I'm just trying to get my mind off the pain. And she said, and how I feel like I'm burning up. So I went and I got a washcloth and I brought it in because I had reached over and I touched her neck, and I mean, it was just like it burnt my hand. And so I've had times where I've just felt like I was just on fire. And the only thing I could do is just get in the shower and I would be running a fever. I get in the shower and just get me a cool shower just to get my core cooled back down. And I was like, well, maybe if I just got her a washcloth, maybe that would help her. So I got her a washcloth, brought it back in there and put it on her neck. And I go back in the room, I drink a glass of milk. About 10 minutes later, I go get me my second glass of milk because I'm trying to get myself to bed at a reasonable, well, it's not reasonable at this point, but so I go back through and the TV is turned off and it's quiet in the room. So I think she finally got some relief with that cold washcloth. But hell is not going to be any relief. There is no cold washcloth. There's nothing to ease off that pain. And we know from the story of Lazarus and the beggar, Lazarus the beggar and the rich man, that is in Luke chapter 16, it says, in Hades, there where he was in torment, talking about the rich man, he looked up and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus by his side. And so he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire. And the time came when the beggar died. Anyway, I don't need to read that part, but basically he cries out and says, I'm on fire, send something. And Abraham's like, no. So as we look back at Mark chapter 9 that I read a while ago, it says the worm dies not. Now, that's what the King James says. The NIV interpreted that as worm. Some people interpret it as being memory. The NIV translates it as the worm that eats them do not die. When I look at the Greek in Strong's, it only mentions the worm, like maggots, things of that nature. But either way, It's torment. And it's constant. And it doesn't stop. And honestly, I think about the memories. If it was memories, I mean, could you imagine going through your life over and over and over again? Either way, it's torment. So, some will claim to belong to the kingdom of heaven, but will go to hell. They are the weeds, the bad fish. They may look good outwardly for Christ, but inside they aren't. Jesus told Nicodemus in John chapter 3, verses 3 through 8, he said that a person must be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven. That when we are born again, it's an inner transformation that occurs when a person repents of sin and receives Jesus as Savior. Church, there's a time for everything, and God will judge us when it's time. Good and evil for now live side by side. But in judgment, God will separate it out. We need to be transformed. We need to be born again. We need to have a new life in Christ. And as we do that, God saves us and sets us free. And then we will avoid that eternal damnation. And so that's what he's showing in these two parables today. The difference between serving God, living for God, and not. You are one or the other. You can never be both. And I preach that a lot. I see it a lot in churches. And throughout the years, I've often said some of the worst individuals to deal with in the church are people who think that they're serving God, and they're not. You show me somebody that's been going to church for 20 or 30 years who thinks that they're right with God, whenever in reality they are living a life that is totally contrary to what God. They don't have a relationship with God at all. They're just got a good show. And those individuals are the hardest to deal with because they think they're there and they ain't. And they're not willing to repent and get their lives straightened up. They turn into the board members that cuss you out, which I've had happen. They turn into the backbiters and the gossipers in the church.
The Karens.
Huh?
The Karens.
The Karens, yeah. They turn into the ones that have always, trying to stir up trouble. And you find that everybody that's in those places is somebody that's dealing with something spiritually, but they're too blind to open up their eyes to the truth and get that stuff out of their life. Let God get that stuff out of their life. So any questions or comments? Besides the fact that I actually got all through all my notes and now it's 1 minute after time for us to. Anybody? Everett? I saw your wheels turn, but it's like you come to a screeching halt.
Yeah, hands free.
All right. Well, God bless, and see you in our Christmas service here in a few.